Okay, chapter 4.5 starts the second half of our unit. This is a 4-week unit, which will actually be 5 if you consider the test, because we only have 2 chapters to go through. I do suggest at this point that you, because the rest of the chapter is very specialized to where it's going to teach you a skill, and you'll practice that skill, maybe use it a couple different ways, but it's not nearly as complex as the first half. So my suggestion to you, especially in terms of getting ready for that pre-test that will pop up in the test week, is to go back to your homework and start using that time to start mastering your homework, as well as looking over the questions that you missed on your quiz, so you can try to figure those out and potentially retake those for a higher score. Remember, again, you have until December 11th to retake them, but I would not like to be in a position where I'm making up a chapter 4 test at the end of the semester while we're working on chapter 5, because it's a whole different bit of information, and so it wouldn't be as easy. But anyway, today we're going to learn 2 key processes. The first process is called completing the square. The second process is just pretty much teaching you or exposing you to solving equations from the form that we create. So we know how to factor, and we know that we can take this thing, and we're looking for numbers that multiply to be 1 times 9, which is 9, and add to be 12. Did I do that right? I didn't do that right, did I? That should be a 6. Sorry. Great job, teacher. And add to be 6. And so, based off of what I know, those numbers are 3 and 3, both positive. Maybe you haven't learned this shortcut yet, but whenever there's just a regular x, what ends up happening, it doesn't work when there's a number attached to x, but when there's a regular x, those 2 numbers typically just end up in here with your factors. So you can go back and check all your work and notice that every time there was nothing in front of x, whatever numbers you started with actually ended up in there, which does give you a brief shortcut. It's not really a shortcut, it's an observation that these 2 numbers always end up in there. So we know how to factor that, which means that this actually is x plus 3 squared, so that's a perfect square. We also have x squared minus 10x plus 25, so we're looking for numbers that multiply to make 25 and add to make negative 10. Again, those numbers obviously are 5 and 5, both negative, and again, because it is a regular x, not an x with a number attached, then we can just put x minus 5, which, since that is the same as just x minus 5 squared. Because both of those expressions are called perfect squares, both of these are called perfect squares because their factors are identical. Therefore, we can write them as a power of 2 like I did right here. The process of completing the square is used to create a perfect square so that we can have this format in it. And what we do is we reformat a quadratic equation. So before we get into the full application, let's focus on the basic fundamentals. Again, be sure to take good notes because this represents almost everything you need for the day. So what you're looking for is the perfect value that makes it a perfect square. So finding the value of c that makes it a perfect square, and here's what you do. So write this down. What you honestly do is you take and you open up parentheses, and you bring down your x, and you copy the sign, and you cut this number in half and put your square. Again, cut the number in half, and then what happens is, because I'm going to square that number, you add the square of that number back here. So that would be a perfect square, because again, if you're looking for numbers that multiply to be 64, add to be 16, 8 times 8 is 64, 8 plus 8, 16, there you go. But that is it. That's the process. That's all you need to know. So again, on this one, first thing you do is open up a parentheses, bring down your x, copy the sign every time. So this sign is going to be here. Cut this number in half, and then bring that number back up here, squared, of course, and that is your perfect number. Multiplies to be 4, adds to be negative 4 is negative 2 and negative 2. There you go. So that's it. Again, write down your notes. So in other words, half it this way, square it this way, whatever you've got to do, but that's pretty much the step you do. Cut the number in half, put a square, square that number, add it to the process, or add it to the value, and that would be your perfect value of c. So the process of finding the perfect value of c is simple enough, but we must keep in mind that we are actually making a new value. And what that does in terms of our algebra is it throws everything off of balance. So when we apply this process, we must be sure to counteract the value that we add. So the completing the square process is here. Again, very short, very straightforward, very simple. But again, you're going to get practice on that on your homework. What we do first is we separate the number out. So we pretty much rewrite this as x squared plus 8x plus 3. Now again, we won't really write that when you do your work, but that's pretty much what you do, is you're going to focus on this part instead of that part. And what we're going to do is we are going to make room for a value to be created. But the thing is, if I add something to the equation, I must offset it by subtracting that same value, or offsetting whatever is added here by putting it out here. And so this really is not our focus. Our focus is taking these two things, adding a value and subtracting that value. Now we do the complete the square part, where we bring down our x and our plus. We cut this number in half to get 4. 4 squared makes 16. That is what's been added to the equation. So if I add 16 here, I must subtract 16 out there, and to simplify it, positive 3 minus 16 is negative 13. This is your perfect completed square version of the problem there. But that's all you have to do. Again, separate the number out, add your value, offset it, and do the completing of the square process by finding C, and that's it. Same thing here. I'm not going to write this line here, because what I'm going to do is x squared minus 14x plus something I don't know. And then to offset it, I'm going to subtract that something I don't know out here. Then I'm going to do the perfect square process. Again, bring down my x, copy the sign, cut that number in half. Again, that's a perfect square. 7 squared makes 49. I know you think, well, that should be negative. Nope, because negative 7 times negative 7 is still positive. If I add 49, I must offset it by subtracting 49. Combine these like terms to get minus 48. And that is it. Now when you do your work on the computer, it's going to ask for your 2 lines of work, so you're going to have to type parentheses and all this, not the line of course, but you'll put parentheses x squared plus 8x plus 16 close, plus 3 minus 16, then you'll type this answer. That will be your 2 lines of information that you have to add to make sure that you actually did the process and didn't just find some way to, get that set up. So when doing the work on MathXL, I guess that's me kind of talking above myself, you need to do the work on a sheet of paper, then copy your 2 lines, as it just said, into the 2 boxes to get your correct answer, because again, I want to make sure that you actually are doing it right. The process of completing the square, and this has nothing to do with this, it actually gets into some higher level work that you're going to be doing with graphing and other things, but again, it's important that you at least know how to do it. It can also be used to solve equations. We'll not go into depth on that because, again, it's not really necessary, but I will show you the steps necessary to find a solution. Just remember, again, we must remove the weakest operation and things should work out fine. So if you were completing the square, you would have a squared number, or a value squared plus something else, and potentially a number out here. And so when you see your problems on MathXL, which look like this, you have to make sure you complete or remove the weakest. The plus 7 obviously is the weakest, so we'll subtract 7, getting 32 equals 2 times x minus 3 squared. The 3 seems to be weak, but that's inside of a parenthesis, so that's actually the strongest. That's stronger than this, so we are going to move the 2 by dividing by 2, getting 16 equals x minus 3 squared. Now to get rid of the squared, we are going to square root both sides, but the key thing to remember whenever you square root both sides is that you must remember your plus minus symbol. And then when I move my 3, I end up with, and I usually just put this number in front of that, 3 plus or minus 4 equals x. So now when I want to put my 2 answers down there, I will say 3 plus 4 equals 7, good. 3 minus 4 equals negative 1, so my answers are 7 and negative 1. That's it. So again, move that number by subtracting, move this number by dividing, square root, move that number but put it in front of the plus minus, and then split and simplify your 2 answers, and that should do it. Same thing over here, add 6, again that's the weakest, you get 262 equals 4 times x plus 5 squared. We then have to move the 4 because that's the furthest weakest number in that operation there. 262 divided by 4, 4 goes into 26 6 times with 2 left over. Did I mess this up? Because it doesn't go into that. I think it should be higher than that. I think that should be 64, which means I think that should be 66, which means I think that should be 260. Sorry about that. I have to make the problem work, otherwise it doesn't make sense. Am I silly? No, it should be two. No, I know what I did wrong. Okay. So that should be 256, which means that should be 250. Sorry about that. Because if that's 256, then you end up with 64 like I need to have because it's one left over. Sorry about that. And then 4 and x plus 5 squared. That was not a good job on my part. But again, that should be 250 equals all this. You add 6, you get 256. 4 goes into 256 64 times. Now we'll divide by 4, getting 16, I hope. And x plus 5 squared. Starting over, add 6, got this. Divide by 4, we got this. I divided by 4 already. I'm silly. Here I go again. Okay. Add 6. That's why I went back, because it just seemed to be weird. Add 6, 256. Divide by 4. And that's what we end up with. Then you will do square root both sides, getting plus or minus 8 equals x plus 5. You will then subtract 5 from both sides, getting negative 5. Again, always attach that plus or minus after, that way it's easier. And then to simplify your answer, negative 5 plus 8 is 3. Negative 5 minus 8 is negative 13. So 3 and negative 13 represent my answers. Just remember that there is a potential of 2 solutions whenever you work with quadratic equations. Practice the process well, again, because your next lesson uses a similar approach for a different purpose. Not talking about this purpose, but the completing the square. This right here, again, is just to make sure that if you had to solve by completing the square, you at least understand to move the added number, divide that number, square root, make sure you put your plus or minus, and then move that number over, making sure to put the plus or minus behind it. But other than that, like I said, that is all you need to know for that. So make sure you answer the question that is on the end of this video, and good luck.